I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Western Libraries, of course. You are in Western Libraries right here. Okay. Let's see. We also are happy to give tours to individuals or to classes. You can tell your professor it would be a great idea to have a tour come in. We also accept donations, and you're welcome to talk to me about that. This is part of our Speaking of Maps program, which has been going on for a year. Quarterly talks designed to highlight the use and value of maps in research, in teaching and learning, and in daily life. I feel like not everyone can see me. Hi. Okay. Some people might think that's a good thing. Okay, and today we are pleased to welcome Andy Bach of Huxley College. Has been in the Department of Environmental Studies since 1995. He has graduate degrees from the University of California at Davis and Arizona State University. I got that right? Okay. Among his ongoing research projects are evaluation of the impacts of dam removal on the Elwha River, geomorphological history of potholes coulee on the Olympic Peninsula? No?
No.
I screwed that
Central
up.
Washington.
Never mind. And I checked, he has had peer-reviewed articles in the Geographical Review, the Professional Geographer, the Physical Geography, among other journals, among others. And today he's here to talk about this other project, which I'm not going to try and repeat because it's right there. And one more thing. Dennis can tell me if I forgot anything else. As you go out and you grab some more snacks, this is a sign-up list. If you sign up for this, you will get occasional notices of our next speaker and other special events at the map collection, which you are more than welcome to hear about and come to. We good? We good? I missed anything? Then we have to pass over the microphone. And once we pass over the microphone, then I'm going to say, let's have a big applause for it. And it's being filmed, so. Okay. Okay. Don't break it.
Thank you. Let's see what happens. All right. Well, thank you. I'll try to jump around. Well, thanks for coming. There's a heck of a lot of you, and I'm thrilled that you're in the map library because this is a great place, and there's a lot of fun things in all these drawers you can find. I'll show you some of the things I found in here. And I also really want to thank anyone who came back in February, was it, when I was scheduled and I got sick. I was laid out for 3 days with the flu, so I wasn't just playing hooky. I'm going to talk about, I actually gave this talk at a national meeting, I think 10 or 12 years ago. This is some work I did out on the Olympic Peninsula then. And these were my co-authors on this paper. Janet Collins is now retired. She was the map librarian before Dennis. And then Paul Gleason and Dave Conca are archaeologists out at Olympic National Park. Paul may be retired now. I don't know if anyone knows, but I think he might have retired now. But we were looking at this place, among others, Ahlstrom Prairie. And Ahlstrom Prairie is out by Lake Ozette, so I kind of call these the Ozette Prairies. They are these treeless areas in an otherwise rainforested area. So if you've ever been out there, you have to take the coast route out, and then it's the Ozette Hoku Road, dead ends at the ranger station, and then to access the prairies, you take the Cape of Lava Trail, and it bifurcates. Ahlstrom's Prairie, I looked at Ahlstrom's Prairie and Roos's Prairies, and so the main thing we were trying to figure out with this work was how did these treeless areas happen to come to be in an area where it just rains like crazy and the forest just grows and grows and grows. It's the Olympic rainforest, this area. There's no rain gauge here, but it gets over 100 inches of rain. It's a Sitka spruce forest, which is a little different than our forest, but it's very similar, just a bit soggier. And these prairies are in what is called the coastal strip of the national park. So most of the park is in the middle of the peninsula, and then there's just a sliver of land a couple miles long that's also part of the park. And a road's never gone in there, and they've never logged it, so it's fairly intact compared to a lot of the peninsula. Here's an air photo of these prairies. You can see the surrounding forest, this kind kind of coarse texture on the air photo. It is this Sitka spruce forest. And then within the prairies, it's low species living there. It's not one homogeneous vegetation type. There's actually a bunch of different vegetation types. There are some sphagnum bogs, and the one big one's this oval that I tried to outline. These trees are kind of growing along the edge of it. Sphagnum bogs are full of sphagnum moss, makes the water highly acidic. Has some really odd species living out there, including sundew, and there's some endangered flowers that live there. Although it doesn't look like much else is in here besides the moss and a few grasses and sedges, there's actually a whole bunch of low species, crowberry, Labrador tea, things like that. So kind of typical of a wet meadow situation. Down in Ahlstrom's prairie, there's not sphagnum bogs. Well, there's the one big bog, and then there's several smaller ones. Ahlstrom's prairie is a little bit different, even though it's right next door. This lighter color patch right through here, and then it kind of spider webs across the prairie, is a sedge-dominated fen. A fen is a little bit less acidic than a bog because the water is actually flowing through it, so it doesn't sit in there and get quite as acidic. So the species growing there are a little bit different. Not too many woody species in this. This is almost all grass and sedges. And then a lot of the rest of the area, these prairies, kind of this medium gray color around, look like this. They're really heavily vegetated with low woody species. So a lot of that bog laurel, Labrador tea, you can see some salal, things like that. And these are growing on top of mineral soil, where these two types of vegetation are mostly on peat bog. So I'm going to give you some of the conclusions first, and then we'll jump back into looking at the maps. My other work has kind of demonstrated that these areas probably started off as the wetlands, and then it looks like the Native American, the macaw, expanded them by burning it, because they utilized a lot of these low species. Labrador tea, cranberries grow out there, some of the sedges they use for basket work and things like that. The macaw had a village just right over here on what's today the Ozette Indian Reservation. They had a village site there that was buried by a landslide about 300 years ago in the year 1700. If you've ever been out to Nia Bay, a lot of those materials that were recovered from that village site are on display there. So it's one of our better known cultural pieces in the Northwest. Now the macaw tribe are mostly known for working in the sea. They were the whalers, sealers, they fished a lot, things like that. There was not much material recovered at the archaeological site that indicated they were actually utilizing material from these prairies, but the close proximity certainly indicates they were probably out there, as well as this trail, the Cape Lava Trail, is prehistoric in nature as far as we can tell. And then the Euro-Americans arrived. There were a few explorations, and then we had a couple homesteaders that arrived in 1908. A pair of guys lived on each of these prairies. This is actually Pete Roos's cabin. Is still standing if you know the secret trail to get out there to Roos's Prairie. They both grazed sheep, so they were utilizing these prairies for livestock grazing. They did drain some of the wetlands. We found networks of ditches out there to try to get some of the water off. And then for some reason, they were also clearing the forest by hand. So for example, at this cabin site, he chopped the trees down. I don't know why he didn't move over 100 feet and was in the prairie, but I guess Norwegians had nothing better to do than chop trees down. It's in their blood. And then it later became part of Olympic National Park in 1953. And so today it's mostly recreational. It is a wilderness area, so you can't use mechanized stuff out there. So what we're trying to figure out is, are these prairies natural? Did any of these groups who have occupied the land over the last 100 years plus manipulate it? And the park was really concerned because what they were seeing is the surrounding forest was starting to invade into the prairie. So it was doing a turnover from this open vegetation type into the surrounding forest. You can really, in this photo, sorry it's a little blurry, but you can see the trees kind of just marching down into the meadow. So we're also looking at how did these prairies change over the most recent time period. We took a real wide range of methods to try to understand this. So there was some archaeology work done. I'm going to present some of this archival work, looking at the maps. We also did a bunch of soil work. We sampled the wetlands as well, and we looked at the vegetation. If I have time at the end of the hour, I'll present some of that, but right now I'm going to focus on the map work that was done. So we used a series of maps, many of which came out of the map library here. Air photos, which used to be housed here. I believe all the air photos are over at the Center for Pacific Northwest Studies now. But I think all the air photos we used, or at least most of them, came from that collection. And we used a little bit of ground photography as well to look for changes. And we were really trying to figure out, for at least this part of the work, how have the meadows been changing historically over time. The other work was really trying to push the history back in time. And I want to point out, so I'm going to show a series of maps now of how these landscapes have changed. The dates that I have on the presentation are the dates which the maps were not actually produced, but when the field work was accomplished, when they were drawing the maps, and the air photos that they used to draw the maps, so rather than the publication date. So this is really the pair of ground photos that started the whole work. Paul Gleason brought this in and said, you know, back in the 1970s, also this is the Cape Lava Trail. Ahlstrom's prairie was wide open, as you can see. No trees on it, distinct edge, the prairie in the distance there. A few small seedling trees, the occasional adult tree. And then by the late 90s, you can see those little seedlings have grown up into not mature trees yet, but they're getting pretty big. They've certainly closed in. I think these branches are probably from this tree. So the older trees have survived. And just in the distance there, that's the same skyline of the far side of the prairie in the distance there. So the park was kind of concerned, you know, what's going on here? Do they need to actively manage this? Do they want to maybe start removing these trees? Are they just going to let nature take its course or whatnot? And the bottom line is they've decided to leave it alone. These field crews were laying these lines out. These are the basis for property lines today. We still use this system to legally define property in at least the western states. So this kind of shows us the lay of the land. If you've ever worked with these GLO maps, usually what they will show is blank for open vegetation, and then if there's a forest patch, they'll show it in dark. But in our neck of the woods, because there's so much forest, most of the map is blank. That represents forest, and this dark blob is open vegetation. It's a prairie in approximately the location of the Ozette Prairies. It's much larger in size than what we see today. So maybe this is telling us that it was a much larger feature on the landscape, and since 1895 we've had invasion of the forest, and by the 70s through 90s we just had some remnant prairies in these locations. A couple other features to point out on this map. Well, there's the one big map. They do take notes as well. There's a notebook that goes along with this. They describe the vegetation. The only thing they described about the prairie was it was a swampy condition. So that didn't help me at all in trying to figure out what was going on out there. They also noted some burns. So they clearly identified this as not just a recent burn site. They identified burns, so they were recognizing this as essentially a meadow. Another thing to point out is Ozette Indian Reservation, and these black squares are houses. So in 1895, the Makah were still living here, occupying that site. There's a few more houses down here, a couple houses down here. So there were natives occupying most of the coastline, along this section of the coast at least. The next map that we could find, and I think this is the one that's in the collection here somewhere, was this 1934 Army Corps of Engineers map. This is a weird map series. I think this is probably produced for warfare, essentially. The USGS, by this point in time, the U.S. Geological Survey, they were creating these topographic maps, but the Army Corps produced this one. It shows a few changes on the landscape. The prairies have become two isolated prairies that look very similar to what we were seeing in the early 90s. So maybe the tree invasion had occurred between 1895 and 1935, 40 years. That could be enough time. Trees could be filling that prairie in. The Indian village has been abandoned, which was true. They forced the Macaw up to the Macaw Reservation in 1922. But the houses were still standing on the shoreline. This is weird. They have people's names of the houses. So that's the Pete Roos cabin I showed an earlier photo of, and then Lars Ahlstrom lived down a cabin right on the trail. Oh, I forgot to point out, on this map in 1895, the Cape of Lava Trail was present right there. Crosses the prairie, and right there. So it's about in its current location, which is pretty accurately depicted on this map in 1935. Yeah?
Ozette Island, is that public or private?
It's Indian property.
Is it? Yeah.
Thanks.
So it's part of the reservation? Yeah.
Ozette Island or Indian?
Well, Indian Island, and that's a misname, actually. This is the, whoops. It's, I can't pronounce it, but it's got a native name on it. But I think Ozette Island is part of the reservation. I think you're correct there. All right. So maybe we're getting some evidence of how these prairies have changed over time. But I was looking at this. I've been out in the field at this site, and I noticed, well, there's some things that maybe don't look right. I already pointed those out. I think we have some map errors here. And all maps do have errors because they're drawn by people. Great GIS folks in the audience. Sometimes you make mistakes or whatever. This was an Army Corps map. They were really probably getting the terrain down in case we ever had to have a battle out here, I suppose, is why they drew the map. So they probably weren't too worried about the accuracy of, say, the hydrology, but the hydrology is way off for the prairie area. They're showing a creek that flows from Ahlstrom's Prairie through Roos's and then tributary up to the Ozette River. This stream actually does not exist, and it definitely does not connect to that stream. These two drainages are not connected in reality, and actually this stream flows south and is tributary down to this stream. So they had the whole hydrology wrong on this map. So that's just one example of what we call a cartographic artifact, which basically means a map error. Someone screwed up. All right, next map was based on 1955 air photos. This is by the USGS. This is a 15-minute map, which means 1 inch is 1 mile. Again, you can see the section lines now. They were on the last map as well, but this is the USGS style of showing the township and section lines in red. A few changes have happened on the landscape. The village site is gone now, so those buildings that had been standing in 34, I don't know if they were torn down or if the weather just wiped them out. The national park's been established, so we have the national park boundary shown in red. This is another cartographic artifact they put on the wrong side of the lake. It's actually the east side of the lake. But interestingly enough, now the prairies are being shown as being connected. So they're showing it as one. So that's a little confusing. The earlier map showed them as being separate. Maybe a fire happened and burned that little patch in the middle there.
Does that say ruins there? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the ruins. So that is Pete Roos's cabin. He had left. He got tired of living out there by himself, and he left in the 1930s, and so his cabin was dilapidated by the 1950s. The Park Service has since rebuilt it. Ahlstrom's cabin is still standing. He was still living here in 1955. My understanding is he lived there through about the mid-60s, and back in the 60s when you hiked the trail, he'd sit on his front porch and offer you tea and coffee and things like that. The next map is from 1978. It's actually this one. So this is a good example of the difference in the date of publication. This map was published in 1984, but it's based on 1978 air photos. And this shows the distribution of the prairies as we knew them in the 90s. So again, the prairies were disconnected. So maybe we're having some real active vegetation changes indicated on the mapping. What else can we say? Trail's still there. Nothing much else has changed. This is pretty much the way it looks out there today. So let's try to see how accurate some of these maps are. If we look at just this 7.5 minute quad, and what that means is it's twice the scale, twice as enlarged those 15-minute maps. So it's more zoomed in. It should be more accurate than the other maps. If we compare it to this 1964 air photo, which is the only air photo we have that's close to 1978, you can see there's a pretty close match to the mapping of the vegetation and the openness of the prairies in 1964. We did some georectification of the photo to the map, did a shape comparison, and the shape comparison showed indeed they are nearly the same shape. So this map does seem to be accurately representing what the air photo was showing. So they did a good job of the mapping in 1978.
There's an island of trees and the Roos's Prairie.
Well, this is 64. This was 78. So there is a 12-year